Hi everyone, it's me, Dr. V, and we're doing some last-minute discussion of test-taking tips for the AP Chemistry exam. This year's exam will be given in a hybrid format. You need to have the Bluebook app downloaded on your device before you show up for your test session. Make sure you know your username and your password. Don't rely on your password manager. I'm actually telling my students to write their password and username down on a piece of paper or on an index card and bring that to the test so that they don't have to worry about getting into Bluebook. And make sure your device is fully charged. The test is over 3 hours long. You want to make sure that it's not going to run out of battery. You might even bring your charger with you. For the 2025 chemistry exam, you will be doing the multiple choice section completely online. You will have scratch paper to use during the multiple choice. For the free response questions, that will be presented to you online, but you're going to handwrite your answers in a paper answer booklet. Just to point out, in case you weren't aware of this, the multiple choice sections and the free response sections are weighted equally. They're each worth 50% of your score. There are a lot of reference materials and resources embedded into the Bluebook app. You will have a paper periodic table for the entire test. You'll also have a digital one, and if you go up into the little reference corner in Bluebook, you can see that. The reference sheet, however, will only be available digitally throughout the entire exam. So you'll have a periodic table, but when you open that up, it'll take over your whole screen, which is why you have a paper version. The reference sheet is tabbed, so you can pull which section you need, but you'll only have a digital version of the reference sheet. For the entire exam, you will have use of the embedded Desmos calculator, and you can pull that down as well. You'll also have the option of using your own handheld calculator, an improved model, of course, throughout the entire exam. Do whatever makes more sense for you. Once you start the exam and you're actually logged in, there will be a timer window. Some students find this really stressful. You can actually hide that timer. My understanding is that it will come back on in the last few minutes of the test so that you know when you're about to end, but that's an important thing to keep in mind. There's also a line viewer feature if you get distracted easily by having other text or images on the page. You can use the line viewer feature to go line by line. Now let's talk about the multiple choice section. There are actually two groups of questions that are found in the multiple choice section. There are discrete questions, which are individual standalone questions on whatever topic they're asking you about. There are also question sets where there are 2 to 5 questions that are grouped around a reaction or an experiment or a diagram, something along those lines. Either way, all of the multiple choice questions have 4 choices each. You do have to pay attention to what the question is actually asking you to do. You want to make sure you read that question carefully. In terms of strategies for multiple choice, keep in mind that you have 60 multiple choice questions to answer in 90 minutes. So on average, that's a minute and a half per question. But you don't want to just work through the exam linearly. That's not going to really help you the most. I recommend using a 3-pass strategy. You're going to go through the multiple choice 3 times. The first time, you're going to go really quickly, less than a minute, 40 to 60 seconds. And you're going to answer all the easy questions. And any question where there's a calculation, but again, it's a very easy one-step, straightforward calculation. You're going to do those quickly. Anything that's tricky, anything that's unfamiliar, anything that you know you can do, but you need a little more time, you're going to save that for your second pass through the exam. There are some nice features embedded into Bluebook for multiple choice. One is the mark for review option. If there are questions you want to revisit or you know you didn't answer or you just want to double check them, you can flag that. There's a little tab and you can mark it for a review. And then there's actually a whole page where it will list all the questions and it'll tell you which ones you've answered, which one you're currently working on, which ones you flagged to go back and review. You can also use the process of elimination. This is really helpful and an important strategy when you're doing multiple choice. You can turn it on or off if you decide that, no, you really did want that choice. Anytime you can eliminate 1 or 2 options, that really raises your chances of getting the correct answer. It really improves your odds. So you're going to do that for your first pass. Your second pass through the exam, you're going to do those more involved questions. Questions where you knew you could eliminate 1 or 2 options, but you still weren't quite sure. You wanted to think about it a little bit more. Questions that maybe have more involved calculations, but you know that you can do these. They're just a little more time consuming. And then on your third pass through the test, any questions you didn't already answer, you're going to go and pick an answer for them. Even if you have no clue what that question's about, even if you are just guessing, you weren't able to eliminate any options, you do want to make sure on pass 3 that all the questions have been answered. Now, in terms of multiple choice questions, some of them are based on calculations. I do want to point out that just because you have a calculator available to you doesn't mean that substitute and evaluate is really the way to go on that particular question. Sometimes there are faster ways to solve the problems. Can you eliminate answers that are clearly too small or too large or just don't make sense for that particular situation? Can you do some estimating? Can you round? Can you find an answer without doing a calculation 4 times? Maybe there are patterns or relationships. I'm thinking like, oh, as you go down a group and molar masses increase for the elements and what that might do to, say, percent composition calculations. You don't have to calculate everything. Sometimes there are ways to estimate and round and take advantage of those skills. A number of questions, of course, will also be conceptual. You have to read these really carefully. They're so wordy. And this format of A increases because of X or decreases because of X, increases because of Y, decreases because of Y. Oh, they're so similar. There's 1 or 2 words different in these choices. You have to go through them really carefully. You can't just look at the first part of the question. You have to read the whole choice. So that can be very difficult and time consuming. And of course, you only have 1.5 minutes, so you want to think about that. You want to be really careful with ranking tasks or sequencing tasks. Make sure you've got it going in the right direction. Did it ask for smallest to largest? Did it ask for largest to smallest? The reverse order is going to be one of the options, so you need to be really careful about that. And I also want to point out that the question is going to have plausible distractors. The College Board really likes to write questions like this, where there's a correct statement as one of the choices, but it doesn't explain the situation here in this question. It doesn't explain the observation. So you want to really pay attention to those kinds of situations. Some other things to keep in mind with multiple choice questions. You can't spend too much time on any one question. If you're not sure, mark it for review, go back to it later. You need to keep moving on. You really need to make sure all 60 questions get answered and focus on the easy ones first, okay? And I also encourage you to be cautious about changing your answer unless you're absolutely certain you've made a mistake. I'm not saying you can't change answers. I'm not saying that at all. But it's statistically more likely that you'll change a correct answer to an incorrect answer than the other way around. So just hesitate and think about it before you make that change. Now, in terms of free response, you have 7 questions to do in 105 minutes. There is fortunately a 10-minute break between the multiple choice and the free response, but it's a really short break. Now, there are 3 long free response questions. They're scored out of 10 points, and they can have 7 or 10 parts to them. They're very involved. They probably change topics, lots of things going on there. My recommendation in terms of your timing is that on your first pass through a long free response question, you're going to try to do in 18 minutes. I know the test instructions say 23, but that leaves you no time to go back and double check your work. So I am really recommending a 2-pass strategy for your free response as well. There are then 4 short free response questions. They're scored out of 4 points each, and they might have 2, 3, or 4 parts to them. They can be kind of tricky. And I'm recommending on your first pass through your short free response questions, you're doing about 7 minutes each question. You want to have a few minutes at the end to go back and finish anything that you weren't sure about or that you had a question about, or maybe you had skipped. You're trying to answer all the parts. You don't want to spend too much time on any one question. If you're stuck, move on and look at something else. There might be other questions that are a little easier for you that you know that you're very confident in, and come back to those harder ones later. Do make sure you read the question prompt really carefully. There are often clues. All right, one of the important clues you want to pay attention to is justify versus explain. Justify means you're backing up your answer based on data or evidence or a calculation, depending on the situation, maybe some math-based reasoning there. Whereas explain is more conceptual. You're talking about theories, you're talking about relationships. It's a conceptual understanding. You want to make sure that you justify when you're asked to justify data, math, versus explain. A claim, evidence, reasoning format can be very helpful, especially if it's a question where you have to make a claim and back it up. I also want to remind you to answer the question being asked. Don't go off on a tangent. Stick to the main point. And look for context clues in the prompt. Sometimes it literally tells you what they want you to do. Make sure you do that. I recommend using the same terms as are present in the question. Did it ask you to agree or disagree? Did it ask whether a value would increase, decrease, or remain the same because of some change? Are you asking whether it's greater than, less than, or not affected? put that in your answer. And if you're making a claim, put that right up at the top. If it's a lab error where we're asking you to analyze what's going to happen to the outcome, to the calculated values because of this lab error, I encourage you to discuss what measurement was affected and how that measurement being affected will change the calculated values that the question's asking you about. So things to keep in mind there. These multi-part free response questions sometimes ask you to develop an answer in one part and then do another calculation with that value. So here's a situation that does happen. You're going through your multi-part free response question and you hit a part, I said it was part B, whatever part it is, and you need the answer to part B to do part C, right? You go out and read part C and it says, oh, based on your answer from part B, and you're pretty sure you can do part C, but you don't know what to do with part B. What do? Well, you don't have to stop, all right? There's a way to recover here. So what you need to do is make up an answer to part B. Yes, this is okay. Literally write down, let the answer to part B equal whatever, and put down a number that is a reasonable kind of value for that kind of question. And then go on and use your made-up answer from part B to complete part C. Yes, this is totally fine. You can do that. Now, you're not going to get credit for your made-up answer from part B. But if you were able to show in part C that you used that made-up answer correctly, you can still earn credit for part C. We're not going to penalize you twice for the same error. On a similar note, if you need to use your answer from part B to do part C, make sure you use the answer from part B to go on and do that next calculation and don't bring in other values. In general, if you're given a particle model diagram, I very much encourage you to count the particles. Make a little list of the number of particles of each type. This can be very, very helpful. We can do stoichiometry problems. We can do buffer problems. We can do equilibrium problems. So many different things that we can do with particle model diagrams. Counting the particles is really, really helpful. If you need to complete a graph as part of your question, and the graph or the diagrams would be in your answer booklet so you can finish them, make sure your axes are labeled, make sure the tick marks, if you have to put the scale in, make sure that the tick marks in your graph are labeled appropriately so that the graph makes sense. What about SigFigs? Students get really worried about SigFigs. The teachers emphasize SigFigs so much, right? I know I do in my classroom. The truth is, in the AP Chemistry exam, it's not that big a deal. One part of one free response question is graded in terms of SigFigs. So out of the 46 points from the free response questions, one of them is graded on SigFigs. It's often going to be reading a measurement. In the 2024 exam, it was taking a measurement from a thermometer, for example, or it could be reading a buret or something along those lines. Sometimes it's taking the difference of two measurements that were given to you in a table, and you have to report it to the right place. So don't stress too much about SigFigs. If you're not sure how to report a particular value in terms of SigFigs, report 3 SigFigs. You want to be specific. Try not to use it. I don't know what substance you mean. If the reader doesn't know, what substance do you mean? If you meant NaCl, write NaCl. If you meant KCl, because you're comparing periodic trends or you're comparing lattice energies or whatever it is you're doing, I don't know which one is it, right? Down the formula or the name of the substance. If the question asks you to include units, make sure they are with your answer. Literally, if the part says include units with your answer and you don't include units, you just cost yourself a point. Don't do that. Also pay attention to whether you did that calculation and it gave you joules or kilojoules. Making sure you're paying attention to heat calculations. This comes up a lot. It also comes up a lot with converting delta G to K. So pay attention to those things. You don't want to lose points for little mistakes like that. Don't waste time writing unnecessary information. If the question just said, write down the hybridization of the carbon atom in this molecule, just write it down. You don't have to explain why. And if you have to do a calculation, whether it's a simple calculation or a more involved multi-step calculation, make sure you show a complete setup for that calculation. I also want to remind you to make your responses easy to read. Make sure your writing is legible and dark enough to scan. All of the paper books are going to get scanned, and that's what the readers are going to have when they go to score your exam. And if it's really faint and we can't read it, or it's really messy, you're not going to be able to get credit for that. Try to minimize stray marks. You don't want little extra lines being near, say, a Lewis structure, and then I can't tell if it's a bond or a lone pair or if it's just a stray mark. Don't put yourself in that position. If you have to erase something, either erase it completely or cross it out and rewrite your answer. and make it easy to find your answer, especially a numeric answer. If you have a complicated multi-step calculation to do, maybe circle it so it's easy to find. I hope you found this helpful. Keep studying chemistry. You've got all that chemistry knowledge, and now it's your time to show what you have learned. If you found this helpful, like the video and leave a comment, and subscribe to my channel to get all my latest updates. You're ready, you've prepared, you've got this. Have a great day.